Welcome to the video. Hang on a second. Right. Thanks for coming back, those of you who are music lovers and interested in prog. Today's video is going to be about part 2 of the best and maybe the rest of progressive rock. I'm going to go through some of the so the first out. Let me just roll back. The first video I did was kind of my favorites, my favorite bands, and the albums that really made the difference or stood the test of time. I put the video up maybe about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, something like that, and got some great feedback, which is great. Thanks for everybody who commented. But there was a lot of love in the comment section for a couple of bands at least that I didn't include in my top 10, I think it was. So I want to cover some of those today. So if you haven't been here before, this channel is a bit of a mishmash. Sure, we're going to talk about music from time to time, music appreciation. I've done a video on punk, on Genesis, on Springsteen, on Van Morrison, as well as the prog one and today's, but I also talk about cycling and hiking and travel, and there's the occasional monologue on an issue of the day. So some videos are going to be of interest to you and some videos aren't. So thanks to everyone who subscribed. It's really nice that people take the time, but don't worry if you see a video that's not of interest, just pass over it and wait for the next one, which is down your street. So anyway, today I'm going to talk about progressive rock again. So I'm going to go through about 10 albums, 10 different bands of bands that didn't make that top 10. So forgive me rambling at the beginning here. Right, the first band I want to talk about, the first album, is Moving Waves by the band Focus, the Dutch band Focus. Didn't include it in the top 10 because, I mean, I can almost describe this as the second division of prog. Those of you who are football fans will know what the second division represents. This is a very good album, but the trouble with this band, they sound a little bit like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, very keyboard dominated, but also Jan Akkerman's guitar. So there's loads of great guitar stuff on this, but also lots of stuff that you think straight lifted from an early Emerson, Lake and Palmer album. Hocus Pocus is on this album. The great track Sylvia was on the following album, Focus 3, which I'm not including today because I think this one is slightly superior and the other one's a little bit bloated because it's a double album. This one opens with Hocus Pocus. It's unbelievable now in the 21st century to believe that a track like Hocus Pocus could have been in the British charts all those years ago. I mean, it's super aggressive guitar workout. It's really excellent. So I do like Focus. I think they're well worth checking out. There's a great box set of like all of their albums. I don't know, it might have 20, 25 CDs in it. I don't know, I bought it a couple of years ago. It sits on the shelf mostly. Dig into it now and again when I'm working. But Moving Waves, that's definitely one worth thinking about. So that's Focus. So those of you who are Focus fans, I mentioned them finally. The second band and second album I want to give some credit to is Camel, the Snow Goose. Now Camel, I think all those early albums are really good. There's an album that follows this called Moon Madness. I saw them on the tour of the Moon Madness tour. That's really good. That's kind of a regular prog band in a sense that it's multi-instrumental, but it's also got some good vocals in it as well. Kind of very soft vocals. But this is kind of based on almost like a symphonic construction. So there's loads of, it's mostly instrumental, lots of highs and lows, really creamy guitar from Andy Latimer, I think it is. Really good. It's kind of an ambient album as well, but it's actually rather beautiful, some fantastic melodies. So a lot of credit to Camel, still going. He's still on the road. So yeah, really good, really nice album. So that's Snow Goose. Moving on, there was a lot of love in the comment section after the first video for a band called Gentle Giant. Now, Gentle Giant, I've seen them. I never really got them, and there's a couple of things. I made a couple of notes here to try and help me explain why. I read something not too long ago when it talked about the appreciation of jazz. Now, I like a bit of jazz myself. Hard to love, but I like a bit of jazz. Got quite a collection of almost all the classic albums. And but what this person was saying about jazz is that there's kind of two different ways to appreciate jazz music. One is the kind of an intellectual approach where the listener revels in the transitions from one soloist to another, kind of the handoffs between one instrumentalist to another, and then back again, and how the themes disappear and then recur. So it's almost a cerebral. People really appreciate this and just admire the improvisation and the cleverness that's involved in making a coherent piece of music. And then there's so people appreciate it for intellectual reasons. Then there's the other approach to appreciating jazz, which is more around the emotional impact. And I think they call it, this person who described it called it was a search for the sublime. It was, in a way, trying to appreciate the music, let it wash over you, and look for the things that really grab you emotionally. And so listen to the music as a whole. So it's not intellectual, it's emotional. And when I think about prog music and Gentle Giant, which I'll come on to in just a second, one of the things that I find with Gentle Giant is that their music lacks emotional impact. Now, what is it about emotional impact? Well, when you think about Yes, Close to the Edge, Genesis, Supper's Ready, Genesis, One for the Vine, what you've got there are long tracks where there is a lot of tension in the track, and it builds and builds and builds, and it releases towards the end, and it's just a thrill. It's really, really great. It really captures you. It's like it takes you to a higher place. And the best exponent of that type of musical construction, I think some musicologist who kind of knows, I don't read music and I don't play an instrument, but I think there are certain notes and certain chords that are well known to have an emotional impact on the listener. And the best example of all is Wagner's Tristan and Isolde, which is a 4-hour, 3-act opera that is extraordinarily well renowned. I'll talk about classical music on a different video. But what Wagner did is that in these 4 hours, he created, I think they call it the Tristan chord. It was like created a tension early on, and that tension was sustained all the way through until the final release at the very end of the opera. And having listened to it many times and seen it performed a couple of times, it is the biggest thrill in music. It's just like, wow. It is like you sat through 4 hours, and you think, and there's a bit in the middle that's kind of meandering, but then it just resolves at the end, and it's utterly fantastic. So some prog bands, like I mentioned, Yes and Genesis in particular, do that extraordinarily well. I don't think Gentle Giant do that. I think they're too clever for their own good. So I listened to this album. I saw them on a tour. I think the tour that this was taken from, and that's obviously mostly the early albums. And it's kind of good, but it jumps all over the place. It's kind of what they're doing is they're showing how clever they are. In fact, when you see them live, or when you did see them live when they were a going concern, at some point in the set, they all changed instruments and were able to still perform very, very, very well. But the music jumps all over the place. It's got all sorts of influences from kind of the Baroque, the folk, kind of choral, but also quite dynamic too. but it doesn't seem to come together. It's never really had that impact on me where it's cohered into something that's really emotionally fulfilling. So the album that I go back to out of all of those is not one of the earlier albums. It's this album, which I think followed the album, live album Playing the Fool. This is called Interview. Why? Because I think this is a bit of a bridge between the longer pieces in the earlier albums, and later on they did a couple more albums where there were much shorter, punchier songs. And in fact, a good example of why they were too clever by half, they put a track on a later album called Bet You Thought We Couldn't Do It, which is just like punk, and it would sit on a punk album, and it's really clever and it's really good. But quite honestly, it's kind of think, well, yeah, you can do that. That's not why I come to Gentle Giant. This one I particularly like. I mean, the title track is great. Another short, Empty City. It ends with I Lost My Head. It's kind of still got a foot in both camps. So that's the one for me. So Gentle Giant, I understand why people really like them. They are very, very impressive. They appeal to the intellect, but not the heart. At least that's in my judgment. Moving on to an album and a band that's kind of more maybe hard rock, or known for hard rock, but I think they still got progressive tendencies in these early albums. And it's this one, band Wishbone Ash and Argus. Now everybody knows, anybody buys a rock compilation will have Blowin' Free on there, which closes side 1 on this album. But this album starts off acoustic, so it's got a very long track called Time Was, a very, very slow introduction, and then kicks in Sometime World, The King Will Come, in fact side 2, King Will Come, Leaf and Stream, Warrior, and Throw Down the Sword. Yeah, really, really absolute classic album, no question about it. I also like one of the follow-ups, or Wishbone 4 this was the third album. Wishbone 4 followed, obviously, and then they lost one of the guitarists. Ted Turnham left, and they replaced him with Laurie Wisefield, and they did an album called There's the Rub, which has a great American West Coast feel, which is a fabulous album as well, but not as kind of folk influenced as this one. So this is on the cusp of prog. I'm going to include it because I can. Wishbone Ash, worth checking out, those early albums in particular. The Strobes, another band that were very folk influenced. Their early albums are very, very folky. And in fact, I think Dave Cousins, who's the leader of the band, recorded several tracks, and it was released later as an album with Sandy Denny, who ended up in Fairport Convention, of course. But this is really great, very keyboard heavy. You've got Dave Lambert's guitar and vocals as well, is very good. There's an opening medley, Autumn, The Winter Long, just beautiful, really good. And then Shine on Silver Sun, which was a single, which is great as well. Hero and Heroine, great big keyboard chords, slamming chords in there. It's really good, very, very proggy. Well worth checking those out as well. They're still going, believe it or not. It's incredible. So yeah, that's the Strobes. Another band that was well appreciated and well mentioned in the comments of my previous video on prog music was this band, Jethro Tull. Now, I didn't include Jethro Tull, and I haven't included their most famous album, which is Aqualung, which has the amazing Locomotive Breath on it. This is the double album, Living in the Past, which was a bit of a compilation, a couple of live tracks, some new stuff as well. Also includes Locomotive Breath. I didn't include them for a number of reasons. One, I think they're very their music is a combination of, it's certainly not symphonic prog, let me just get that clear. It's this combination of folk and hard rock. And that folk and hard rock thing just kept going most of the way through their career. And I remember the leader, Ian Anderson, saying quite a number of years ago is that he didn't consider Jethro Tull to be prog. I think he's changed his tune as prog's had a bit of a resurgence in more recent years. But they're definitely well worth exploring. I particularly like this album because it goes right back to the beginning. and up until right up until the Aqualung era. Excuse me. Yeah, very good album. Jethro Tull, worth exploring. Not as proggy as I've mentioned, as some people might imagine them to be. At least not in my opinion. A band that's definitely proggy, and not a British nor American band, but an Italian band. Somebody asked me to talk about Italian prog. Well, I can't really, because I'm not really an expert in Italian prog, and I'm not an expert in French prog, because there were some great albums released by bands from those two countries way back in the 70s. So I've hoovered some of those up since on CD. But this band, Premiata, wow, I used to be able to rattle off their name. Call it PFM, of course. What do they call them? Yeah, no, just PFM. They shortened to PFM in those days. Never mind. Premiata Funeria Marconi or something like that. Anyway, this is an album that followed. The first album was released with English lyrics, written by Pete Sinfield, I think, who wrote lyrics for King Crimson. Was released as Photos of Ghosts. A great album, followed by The World Became the World, and then this album came along with a new vocalist. I thought the Italian vocalists in the first couple of albums were absolutely great. But this one, they've got this guy here called, where is he? Bernardo Lanzetti. He sounded like a very overexcited Peter Gabriel, but really good. But this band is great. They've got electric violin, features very strongly, not so much guitar, big keyboards. The two albums I mentioned, Photos of Ghosts and The World Became the World, got a lot more Mellotron on it than this one. But this is exciting. They're really on fire here. So they can go from relatively quiet acoustic guitar and quiet lyrics to something that's really, really hard hitting. So this is really exciting album. In particular, the first two tracks I just think are amazing. From Under and then Harlequin. There's only 5 tracks on the album. The title track closes side 1, then you got Out of the Roundabout and Paper Charms, which are both a bit longer than the previous 3. But that's a really exciting album, well worth getting. I'm not sure if you can get it so much these days, but there's a double compilation on CD that I also acquired, which hoovers up all the best tracks from the early albums. I was going to bring it with me today, but I've just left it elsewhere. But that's definitely worth going for. PFM, great band. Saw them live in the 70s too. Another band I saw in the 70s, Newcastle City Hall, way back when. Saw them a couple of times. The Canadians, Rush. I remember seeing them. They must have been just. I got into them with the album All the World's a Stage, because they were very hard rock in the early years. And then 2112 came along, and so they got the kind of hard rock feel, but much more progressive. Sidelong title track, of course. And I saw them perform 2112, and they must have been promoting the previous album, Farewell to the Kings, because they premiered Xanadu. And none of us had heard it before, but it was absolutely amazing. So that's a great album, Farewell to Kings. This is the follow-up, Hemispheres. Super dynamic. Lots of keyboards on this one. Obviously, Alex Lifeson's guitar, and incredible percussion from Neil Peart as well. Hemispheres itself, 18 minutes. You've got The Trees, which has got some great crescendos near the end. La Via Strangiato closes the album as well. Really exciting. Sounds fantastic loud. Really brilliant. Really good band. The later stuff, where the shorter tracks, is less appealing to me. And to be completely frank, Geddy Lee's vocalist do my head in. There's something about that high-pitched tone that he has that I think it got better with age. I think he dropped an octave or something in his voice, something like that. But anyway, his voice became more tolerable later on. And there's a load of albums later on in the 80s that I've acquired but have really never really captured my attention. So I don't dig into them very, very often. An album that most people don't know, but I think is an absolutely fantastic album, is this one called Go by Stomu Yamashita. And it also includes Michael Shreve and Steve Winwood from Traffic and the Spencer Davis Group. This is a beautifully atmospheric album. It sounds so dynamic. Lots of percussion because Yamashita was a percussionist, but loads of great keyboards, and the bass goes way, way low without kind of buzzing your speakers. It's really, really good. Some beautiful, beautiful melodies on this one. It's like it's kind of a bit ambient, but also a bit straight ahead sometimes, because there's a famous track here called Crossing the Line. Well, I remember I used to listen to the Alan Freeman Saturday Rock Show in the UK, the famous Alan Freeman, and he used to play Crossing the Line on a fairly regular basis. I'm not sure how many people then went out and bought the album, because there's not many of them around these days, but it, in the end, turned out to be an absolutely fantastic album. I love that album. And finally today, before I talk about some of the others that missed the cut, a band that kind of gets mentioned a lot in prog circles, but I've never really understood the appeal too much, even though I've got a few of the albums. My favourite of theirs is an album called Blind Dog at St Dunstan's, which is the band Caravan. So they're from the so-called Canterbury scene, the Soft Machine and Kevin Ayres and others from that famous Kent town. This is a compilation of tracks from their earlier albums, including live versions and so on. It's double one. It's worth getting. What lets them down? Well, I think the vocals are absolutely terrible. They're so weak. I mean, there's plenty of bands in the prog arena that focus on instrumentalists rather than vocalists. Vocalists of the caliber of, you know, Dave Gilmour or Peter Gabriel or John Anderson are few and far between in the prog genre. And here it's particularly bad. They also don't really have much in terms of guitar. It's they've got a single sort of tone on the organ. So it's not very varied. Caravan aren't very varied, but there's a lot of love for Caravan around, and they're worth hearing, although they won't take you to places that some of the other bands will. So that's the first video was about the top 10. This is maybe the next 10. And let me just say something about some of the bands that I might have mentioned. And let's make a note of some of them here that are worth exploring. Well, Marillion, of course, they came out in the 1980s, came along in the 1980s with Script for a Jester's Tear, which was another hysterical Peter Gabriel copyist, in Fish as the vocalist. But very, very high quality stuff, but it kind of had all been done before. They were so influenced by early 70s Genesis, it was kind of laughable, but they were so good, and they still continued and still continue today, so definitely worth exploring. Pendragon, the guitarist and vocalist there, is it Nick Barrett? He's got the guitar tone of Dave Gilmour, but he's a terrible vocalist as well. But loads of great melodies, very dynamic sound. So if you can tolerate the vocals, the instrumental passages are well worth exploring. The Flower Kings, which released a lot of albums, they're still pumping them out. I think about the first 4 or 5 albums, they're all like doubles with hour-long tracks and so on. Again, very influenced by Genesis. Porcupine Tree and Stephen Wilson. Now, Porcupine Tree turned a little bit metalish later on, but the earlier albums, more psychedelic, influenced a little bit by Hawkwind, a little bit by Gong, definitely by Pink Floyd as well. So Porcupine Tree, anybody watching this video will know about Porcupine Tree. Alan Parsons Project, few albums worth exploring. Lack personality to me. There's really just very, very polished, really. And talking about polished, there's the Americans, Kansas. Loads of great tracks. Carry On My Wayward Son, or Carry On Wayward Son, famous single from the late 70s, I think it was. I quite like them, but I've never really taken them to heart either. Opeth I like. They became more and more progressive, moved away from metal to more progressive, lots of Mellotron. So they are, I kind of really been digging into those for the last 3 or 4 years, and there's loads more that I can explore with them. And then there's Gong, which is kind of more of a jazzy style, which is also worth exploring. It's kind of spacey, jazzy style. Bands that I know people absolutely love but have done really nothing for me, and that's Dream Theater, Tool, Mars Volta, and to a lesser extent Styx from the earlier era. I just don't like prog metal. I like metal music, I like hard rock, but the idea that these bands can throw some strange time signatures in and then put crunching chords in there, it's just, to me, it's just a little bit too obvious, and I'm really doing them a disservice. I know Dream Theater have got a fantastic reputation and they're stellar musicians, and the stuff that I've heard, I do like it, but I'd moved through my golden period of prog appreciation before they came along, but they just never really grabbed my attention, so kind of the metal element turns me off. So anyway, that's it. That's me talking a little bit about more about progressive rock. I hope you've enjoyed the video and have enjoyed this little monologue. Maybe been inspired to pick up a couple of albums, maybe there's a couple of new ones that I've mentioned. I hope so. So thanks for watching. Now, appreciate any comments people have. If anybody wants me to do a video or talk about a particular genre or subgenre, I've got pretty wide musical tastes. I don't want to do too many of these videos, but I know I've got a little bit of a pipeline that I'm working on, and certainly I know I've missed some excellent albums. I know I have, and some very very competent bands, which I probably like anyway, but I've forgotten, but never mind. So forgive me for that. Please leave a comment, recommendations on what I might do next, and I'll see if I can pick it up, and then I'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Cheers.